All right, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who are watching live, I'm here with Steve Shermer, the founder and president of Silk Road Catalyst. I'm really excited to be talking to you, Steve, today about why disciple making among the unreached on the Silk Road matters. And welcome, Carlton. So, why don't you go ahead, Steve, and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, other than what David just said, I have I've been involved in China since 2000. We lived there for a period of time. I'm originally a born and bred Texan, a
Okay.
Texan boy, and but most of my heart, I would say, is on the Silk Road.
Is it?
So it gets a bit challenging to be here in the States sometimes, just because my heart's over there.
Yeah.
But 2.5 years ago, we left China, and God brought us to where we're at today in South Carolina, which wasn't home for either one of us when we got here. So
Home is a
uh,
very elusive thing for the missionary venture, isn't it,
it,
though?
it is, it is. But for a Texan, it is always Texas is always
Okay.
on,
All right. That is
always
something
up there.
specific to Texas, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me go ahead and introduce myself as well, and we're going to continue chatting here. But my name is David Joannis. I'm the founder and president of Within Reach Global. I have a similar story to Steve's. Been living in China for nearly the last 20 years. Moved there in 1997, and later my wife and I were able to found Within Reach Global. You can check it out there on the link withinreachglobal.org, and reaching unreached people groups in very rural settings as well as urban settings. And I also blog, by the way, at davidjoannis.com. You can check that out. So, by the way, if you're watching live, again, I'll just mention you could feel free to chat at any time. We'd love the engagement of this. So, Steve, why the Silk Road? I mean, you're talking about. I as well spent many years in China. Come to another place. We're in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Transition. Uh, what first initially grabbed your heart for the Silk Road? And in a minute, we're going to talk about what in the world the Silk Road even is.
Well, I would say what really grabbed my heart was when we lived there,
Okay.
because we lived in are really at the beginning of the Silk Road. So if you're familiar
Okay.
where the beginning is, you'll figure out where I was at.
So, are
And
we not mentioning names and places? By the way, I just want to be sensitive
yeah,
about
I don't
your
I
anonymity.
don't want to mention those things.
Okay.
I'll be a little bit vague on locations.
Okay, well, in a moment here, I did want to post a link from the beginning to the end of the Silk Road. I mean, I think it's pretty general
Yeah,
online
well,
anyway. Is it okay to do that or
it is what it is. So
no?
sure.
Okay.
I mean,
So-
you can Google it if you want. You're going to figure it
yeah,
out.
exactly. Yeah.
And but oddly enough, when I first started getting involved in China, I think I had passingly heard that the city was the beginning of the Silk Road, but I didn't really
Hmm.
understand what it was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until living there, starting to become more and more um, informed, I guess you would say, about it, and just
Uh-huh.
just falling in love with the city. It wasn't my favorite place when I first went to China. And it
I've been
was
there.
actually the very first place I went to outside the U.S.
Is it?
And
Okay.
so at that time, I really didn't like it.
Yeah. I could probably share those feelings with you. I went there on, strangely enough, an anniversary getaway because it is a historical,
It is,
place to go.
but now yeah, I consider it one of my hometowns. I consider it my Asian hometown,
Yeah.
and
Okay,
I
so Steve, I'll just pause you there. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be mentioning the city's name here in a moment. Is that okay?
sure, that's okay.
I mean, if you don't feel comfortable with that, we'll just leave the anonymity open here.
Sure. Well, I might as well just go ahead.
Okay.
Got my son in the background.
Hey, so he was there with you, it probably looks like in China.
He
How old are you,
was.
buddy? How old are you?
Whoop. How old are you?
9.
You're not 9.
9.
How old are you?
Give him a mouse.
How old are you?
So he looks like he spent some time there in China as well. Third culture kid.
9.
I don't know what he's saying. He's saying 9, but he's yes, he was 1 when we went. So
Okay.
and we had some interesting things happen when we came back. Just him getting adjusted back to the States here, and
Oh yeah, the life of a third culture kid is not an easy one, is it?
yeah, my daughter, the first time she came back, she's older, so my wife came back with the kids first, and just going through the airport, Gianna kept looking around with this strange look on her face, and so my wife asked what was going on, and so Gianna said, "Where's all the Chinese?
Yeah.
I don't understand where these people came from." So
yeah, so many foreigners here, right? I just recently did a conversation with a friend of mine, sewing into the lives of third culture kids, and I'm going to make that link available here. But yeah, so Steve, what originally led you to this city? I'm just going to mention the name if you don't mind.
go ahead.
Yeah, it's Xi'an. In fact, let's just start like this. The history of the Silk Road is a very unique one. I mean, this was the original trading route that was set up 200 years before Jesus came to the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the city starts, the Silk Road starts in a city called Xi'an, which is northeastern China, and continues all the way through the 1040 window of what we now call where the most unreached people groups of the world are, all the way into Zion, and then continuing on to the Mediterranean. But strangely enough, Xi'an is the same exact pronunciation of the city Zion. You can check out that link here in Chinese. So it goes from Zion to Zion, really.
Yep, that's true.
So tell me a little bit more about the Silk Road as you understand it, and what originally caught your attention and passion for it.
Well, I would say what got my attention for it was when we decided to move to China, we were going to move somewhere else. But in the end, we just knew this was the place. And so it really I didn't fall in love with it till I actually got there.
Okay.
And so as it became home to us and we knew we weren't going anywhere, it just had that effect on us. And I've heard that from many people who have moved there. Even some of my Chinese friends have said the same thing. But once they got there and just got involved in the city and the people, they just absolutely fell in love with it. And oddly enough, I yearn to go back. It's been probably 6 months since I've been there, and I really want to get back to visit.
Yeah. You're still there, Steve?
Yes.
Okay. My video has kind of cut out, so I can't see myself or you, but I think everyone else sees us just fine. It might be something to do with my cache.
Yeah, I can see you, so we're okay.
Okay, good. So, yeah, I went there, let's see, I think it was the first time, 2008 it might have been. Obviously you got the terracotta soldiers where the mummy, if you guys have seen The Mummy, who here has seen The Mummy, the movie? It's based in that city, right, where the terracotta soldiers are?
Yep.
And so you got a ton of very unique China history set in this place. Thanks, by the way, Brown Boy Studios for telling your friends on Twitter about this blab. But yeah, so you see the paramount importance of the Silk Road throughout history, trading back and forth throughout Europe, all the way through the Middle East into China. What do you think? What do you see about the importance of that now?
There's I look at it in two different ways. I look at it. We've got the Silk Road, we've got the Maritime Silk Road, we've got other major trading routes that basically go through the same regions, and they represents the most unreached areas of the world. So that's one aspect of it. But in growing with my passion for the Silk Road, I started seeing another perspective of it. So as you were mentioning the international trading route and really the aspect of it, that it was a economic driver, a international business trading route. It connected China with Europe, all the way into Europe, even across Asia and the Middle East, and even in parts of Africa. It connected everybody, so business was able to grow. Now, the original idea was to develop, you could say, business or trade between countries, to sell our goods to gain their goods, and vice versa.
Yes.
But
Silk being one of the major ones, right?
Yeah,
That's how it got its name.
Really what started it. And then it just grew into so many other things, into spices and all kinds of things. But one of it could have been unintentional results. I don't know what they were thinking way back then, but one of the results of it was it opened the door for philosophical ideas, religious ideas, to start migrating to other countries and to other regions. I mean, that's how, at least as far as the research I've done, as far back as we know, the 7th century AD is really how Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism all came into China.
Wow.
And it all came into, Xi'an was the capital at the time. And so you've got the first, from what I understand, the first mosque, the first Buddhist temple, bringing the scriptures back or the Buddhist scriptures back from India into China. And then you've got the first church from the Nestorian missionaries coming in from the Middle East. You've got actually the original buildings of all those still intact. Or the church is still partially intact.
Okay.
And so it's just not a big tourist site, but it's still there. And it's recognized by the government, and they've got information of it. They've got stuff inside the city museum about it as well. And so,
well, if the religious issues didn't exist in China, that would be a massive tourist industry. I mean, those are very unique relics from history. So this is as you're talking, Steve, it seems like this is somewhat of a history lesson for many people, and we don't want to make it a boring history lesson. To me, though, it's intriguing. The gospel always comes in to a place from a foreign entrance. So the gospel will be preached in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the world. And you see this connection specifically on the Silk Road, linking these different religions, like you said, philosophical ideas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all that, none of that would have moved if the Silk Road hadn't have been started. I mean, it's always possible, but that's what I find so fascinating about it. You had to have an open door first. And it's like, what we do with Silk Road Catalyst. I mean, we leverage those vocations and the business and the careers as our, you could say, those economic drivers to open the door for us in our ministry to get into these places. So that's why we reference it back to the Silk Road, because that's how I view the Silk Road, and that's what it did. Now, they weren't intentionally doing it. It just happened.
Sure.
But a lot of that probably wouldn't have happened without it. And and so that's why that's why I promote, getting people to work within their secular careers, but intentionally on the Silk Road because of the Unreached, and using that to open the doors naturally to start sharing the gospel and making disciples.
Yeah. Well, speaking of business ventures along the Silk Road, strangely enough, I just ran across a link yesterday, China's investment in Africa. We're only talking Africa here. Part of or along the Silk Road, but I was amazed to see, again, these connections would not be here in the 1040 window. Again, we're talking the 1040 window, which is a 10 to 40 degree latitude that stretches across from West Africa all the way across to the Asias, and includes the world's unreached peoples. Literally, they've never, ever once heard the name of Jesus. 2 billion people we're talking about. Steve knows all about this. And the world's poorest of the poor. This is the block, the region of the world that we're talking about. In the missions world, we usually talk about the 1040 window, but we wouldn't necessarily mention the Silk Road, strangely enough, although it's had tremendous impact on it. But I just saw yesterday this China's investment in Africa by the numbers. Last year, 2014, China being Africa's top trading partner, goods and resources exchanged were $222 billion worth of goods into Africa. And this is only one of many nations that China's interconnectedness now is very powerful.
Yeah, they're being very strategic right now. And they have, just what I've seen them doing in Central Asia. I mean, last time I checked, I don't know what's changed, but China owns the vast majority, if not almost 100% of the trucking industry in Kyrgyzstan.
Oh.
And so they're like this quiet lion behind hidden in the bush, just going out and just quietly just moving their influence everywhere.
That's China's way, isn't it? I mean, after spending,
way.
But
they're smart. I don't blame them.
Yeah. What Brown Boy Studio said, what is China's biggest trade with Africa? Check out that link above there. Actually, I don't know offhand. I don't know if you do, Steve. What is China's biggest trade with Africa? But what I do know is China is investing massive development and infrastructure. I was in Liberia 4 years ago, and you see Chinese construction workers everywhere. They're paving roads, they're building houses, they're building buildings. And so I think what the exchange is from goods to infrastructure going into Africa, goods coming from Africa. Am I wrong about that, Steve?
That's probably part of it. And there's always the economic part. I think the thing I was thinking about was influence. I think they're thinking very long term.
Yeah.
Part of it. It's economic driven, but they're also looking at influence because they don't want it. It's not a short term economic benefit. It is, but they're just not looking short term.
Sure.
They bring in people all the time from, in our city, we had one university had over 500 international students, mostly from South Asia, Middle East, and Africa.
Wow.
There's a lot of students coming into China from these countries that they're getting free. They're even getting paid by the Chinese government to study and get their degrees there, because these are the people they're going to go back to their countries. They're going to become the leaders of their countries, and they're going to have a favorable view of China.
Yeah.
So 20, 30, 40 years down the line, they're not going to want to do anything to hurt the people who benefited them. They're probably there's a higher probability they're going to be good to them.
Yeah, that's true.
I think they're building their future, if you know Chinese, their future guanxi in advance.
Guanxi is how everything works, right? If you don't have guanxi, you don't have anything.
So
guanxi being the relationship, building. Hey, you know all about that, huh?
So yeah, and then even in that, it ends up being economic driven in the long term.
Sure.
Ultimately, but they're doing it everywhere in India, Pakistan. You name it, it's there.
Yeah. Okay, so China building long term, the Silk Road connecting China all the way throughout Middle East, into the Africas, into Europe. Now, what is your passion, Steve? Why we're talking about why disciple making among the unreached on the Silk Road matters. It does matter because there are literally people who have never, the gospel is only good news if it gets there in time, right? And so you have all these millions of people who have not heard in the Islamic, Buddhist, animist, unaffiliated Hindu blocks who've not heard of Jesus before. Why does it matter making disciples among the unreached on the Silk Road? And what are you guys are doing, or what is your heart behind the ministry there at Silk Road Catalyst?
Well, I think why it matters is because, I mean, I've always believed that everyone's, I know we don't deserve anything because we're all, we all face God's wrath until we're redeemed. But, they deserve access to the gospel just as much as I do. For whatever reason God designed it, I just got to be born where I was, where I got to hear the gospel probably thousands of times growing up, even after becoming a believer. But, there's just so many, with whatever figure you're looking at, 90%, 95% of the people who don't have access to it, or the very least amount of access to it, live in that region. Yeah. It is our responsibility to get there. And I still scratch my head sometimes and wonder why after 2,000 years, we still have this problem.
Well, the only problem is it's a problem of priorities. We have enough resources in the Christian world. Look, Brown Boy Studios says it seems like the perfect place for God to display his awesome power. That's true. It is the most amazing place to see massive fruit, a massive harvest. I mean, literally, you have fruit rotting on the grounds, falling from the trees because people are longing to hear the gospel so much, and yet there are no Christians, no missionaries, no churches, no Christian broadcasts, no Christian bookstores, absolutely no access to the gospel. So it's a priority issue. We are so myopic in our perspective sometimes, either as individuals or as the church evangelistically. We're not focusing on the final frontier of missions. The final frontier of missions is right on the Silk Road. Okay. We're talking about unreached people groups being classified not as small subgroups. We're talking ethno-linguistic tribes and people groups. Revelation 7:9, right? All the nations, tribes, tongues, languages represented at the throne. And we're not talking about, there's unreached people groups in America. I don't think so, because coffee connoisseurs and hackers are not unreached people groups. We're talking about separate, ethno-linguistic tribes who have not yet heard. Sorry, I could go on a tangent about that. But yeah, you're right. It's not happening because it's not a priority.
In terms of like the unreached, if you look at the Silk Road and just the unreachedness of it, this is where the highest concentration, I mean, because of the lack of the gospel, the lack of the church in this region, you've got the highest concentration of poverty. The highest concentration of trafficking of all kinds of I mean, it's the birthplace of Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and you in Baha'i, and you just keep going from there. I mean, it is the neediest. I mean, there's always people arguing with me. Oh, what about the needs over here? Well, compared to everywhere else, relatively speaking, this is the neediest spiritual area in the whole world.
Yeah.
And we have just done a pathetic job. And I'm sorry, I'm using, it may be too strong. I don't know, but
I think
bad job in getting resources there and the manpower there.
Yeah.
Especially when we're just a few percentage of the actual missionaries going out are going to this area.
Yes. Oh yeah. Armed with 2% of our missionary task force. Out of all the missionaries globally, 2% go to the unreached area. And you know how much they're armed with? For every $100 given specifically to missions, not to other church-related things, specifically to missions, $1 will go to reach the unreached. That's 1 penny out of every $1. So I think the reason Steve uses the word pathetic is because I agree. We're passionate about those people. The unreached are not just a bunch of statistics, right, Steve? I mean, they have names, faces. To me, their names are Ligoyen. Their names are Fuming, they have real names and dreams and aspirations and no hope to ever once hear the gospel, know a Christian, or ever understand who Jesus is.
Yeah, and most of the people I know involved are in that part of the world, but it's just whenever God started leading me in this direction of missions, I mean, I just getting to people like this, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And then I met this guy on my very first trip to China, that just a very well-educated man. And you start talking to him, and you discover all these things, that he's never heard of Christ. He's never heard of Bible. I mean, we're talking about a guy with a master's degree.
Wow.
He was actually in the process of heading to Canada to relocate there. But he was oblivious to every single bit of it.
Wow.
And he wasn't stuck in some village out in the middle of nowhere. He was in a major city, with a big education behind him. So
we're not talking about the unreached people groups as we think of them anymore. I mean, we're talking about, just strangely enough, there is simply no understanding, whether you're in urban mega city, or whether you're in a rural countryside.
Exactly. And what I find also exciting about this area is you've got, we're always trying to get more Westerners to go. I still believe Westerners have a part to play in all this, but you see a rising group of Chinese feeling called to go out, Chinese believers.
Yeah.
You've got Africans from different countries. I mean, I have a friend from Ethiopia serving in Asia, and he tells me Ethiopia is the poorest country in all of Africa. And yet his network of churches is sending out missionaries. You've got
awesome. Good for him, man.
A network in Kyrgyzstan, which is only like 0.1.2% Christian or something like that. And you've got something driven by the youth of the few churches that are there. They're actually already going into places like Afghanistan, Turkey, Pakistan, Northwest China, getting their church to engage in missions, not just in their own culture, but outside of their borders. I mean, there's a guy there, an indigenous guy, who's training them up. Every summer they do this, and they've even sent someone long-term to Turkey to serve among the Muslims there. I mean,
places that you and I, Steve, would have a hard time going. Right.
Yeah. And of course, then you got the South Americans and all that. And there's just an exciting rise of potential missionaries that are coming, that are kind of slowly coming toward the surface, that want to go.
Yeah.
And while, part of what I'm doing is still talking, I still go around the US when I can and get people to go. But, another big side of our ministry is we're working to get those believers from those other countries. We're talking to people in India, churches in India. We're definitely talking, dealing with something in China on this level already, and even up in Russia. And it's just exciting. Maybe the West, and maybe that's part of my frustration. Maybe, I don't know if God's not going to use the Western church as much as maybe I would hope. I don't know, but maybe either because we're not doing it, or because for whatever reason, these other churches are rising up. I still, I strongly believe the missions isn't about the West to the rest.
Sure.
It's about the reach to the unreached. So I'm excited that these other ethnic groups, these other churches, even from you considered unreached countries, wanting to get involved still.
That's pretty amazing. I really like what you said. Missions is not about the West to the rest, but from the reached to the unreached. And as you kind of watch the travel of the gospel, Brown Boy Studios, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, or anyone else who's watching. By the way, first of all, if you're watching on your browser and you have not signed in on Twitter, you're unable to engage and chat, call in. You can actually call in if you sign in. So you might want to refresh your browser, sign in with Twitter, then we could actually see you on here and interconnect. But you see the gospel traveling, right, from a western direction, from the time of Jesus, Samaria. No, it went from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and started to go through through European nations, into the Americas, and throughout Africa. Finally hit Southeast Asia. I mean, hundreds of years ago, a few hundred years ago, and now you see the continuing passion of the Chinese underground church, the Filipino church, Indonesian, etc., with this back to Jerusalem movement. We're talking right along the Silk Road of people going from Zion to Zion. So now the reached from all these other nations who have just recently, I'm talking the last few hundred years, heard the gospel, are continuing to bring it back and travel throughout the most unreached areas that you and I are going to have a hard time going to. So it's not that God isn't going to use the Western church, obviously, but it is true. We've got to get this myopic perspective and ethnocentric version out of our head that God is waiting for America or Americans to save the world. Not at all. He's waiting for the church, his body, regardless of where they are or what ethnicity they are or what color their skin is, to rise up, finish the task of reaching unreached people groups.
You know what you just said? This Ethiopian friend of mine, what I find so exciting about him, and I wish I could steal him into our work, to be honest.
I felt that about certain people, yeah.
He's been in this country. I won't say where he's at
Okay.
just because of what he's doing, but he's been in this country where he's at now for about he's coming on 3 years.
Okay.
And in that 3 years, he has learned the language. He's teaching in the language. And he's training up indigenous believers already to be missionaries, and he's already sent some out.
Wow. Similar story to yours as far as language learning?
Huh?
A similar story to yours as far as language learning?
Yeah.
Easy, right?
Just ask my language teacher. That's exactly right. And I've just been so intrigued by him because even what I just said, that happened in 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen one. I mean, I haven't done it, and I'm from the U.S.
Sure.
And I haven't seen any Western missionary. And I know it's not him accomplishing it. I know God's doing it through him, but
there is some sort of cultural background.
He comes with the least resources. He comes from the poorest nation in Africa, according to his words. And he has everything going against him. And yet God's using him in a huge way.
That's awesome.
And it just keeps multiplying. And every time I talk to him, and every time I go back and meet with him, I'm just blown away at what God's doing through this guy. And I'm blessed that I even get to know him. Just because, and I mean, I could just go on and on about him.
Yeah, these are the missionary heroes that the world will never hear about. The faceless, the nameless ones. He will never.
I know. I wish I could say his name, but he'd get in trouble probably.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons, obviously. Security's sake. I mean, you have most certainly, I'm sure, Steve, had run-ins with the authorities. I've personally been interrogated 22 times while I was in China. In fact, only 6 months ago was my most recent time of heavy persecution, interrogation. One of our local missionaries were actually beat up at the border. And strangely enough, in 4 days, I am taking my wife and daughter back to that same city, 1 block around the corner from the police station, to go officiate the wedding of the guy who was beat up by the police. So, you can't, these are the places that have to have a sense of anonymity, but these missionary heroes are the ones who are never going to be recognized, perhaps on earth, but we may be surprised at the weight of the jewels on top of that guy's crown as he stands before the throne with all these different people groups and tribes and people he has made disciples of and reached along the Silk Road and unreached areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Obviously, we're talking about the importance of disciple making on the Silk Road, unreached people groups. I just renamed this blab, by the way, the Silk Road Missionary Venture Final Frontier, because I do pray that through this little conversation, people would be inspired to remember those who are forgotten, specifically those along the Silk Road in the 1040 window. But before I finish, Steve, I wanted to ask, what are some of your needs at Silk Road Catalyst, and how can we pray for you?
Oh, gosh, we've got
A million?
that's trying to narrow. I should always narrow that down ahead of time because I know those questions are coming.
I'm no sorry.
One thing, we have we're launching a missionary training center in Asia.
Okay.
Lord willing, it's been in the works for quite a while, and we were hoping it would be open this year, but it's not. And but however, everything looks good to go next year. So without giving any more details than that,
Sure.
We just pray that the wisdom would come together, that God would just do what he just says in James chapter 1, that he would just give us the wisdom we're asking for to really dot the I's, cross the T's, and be able to launch this thing that we strongly believe God put on our hearts in 2013. Really long before that, but that was just kind of the initial phase of getting it going. So you can tell it's been in the works a while.
Yeah.
The other thing is we're developing our ministry into, I would call it a hybrid mission sending agency.
Okay.
I strongly believe the local church needs to have a much stronger role in sending.
We have to talk more about this because we share that passion.
And so, just over the years, and I won't get into all of it, I've just seen a lot of things through friends, through my personal experience, really a personal experience I had with a previous church. I just believe that while there is no perfect sending agent, the church is the best one we can have. And so when I say hybrid, meaning we're gonna partner with them. We're not just going to be the sending and carrying of the missionary. They have to take on a lot of that responsibility.
Yeah.
And we're just, and I don't even know how it's going to turn out in the end, but we're not going to be the primary encourager. We're not going to be the primary accountability partner for the missionary, but we're still going to be there because we have the knowledge and the expertise of the mission field.
Yes.
Of course,
someone who provides a platform for other missionaries, indigenous perhaps, to reach their own nation.
We become a very logistical group. We handle a lot of the logistics and can empower and teach and train churches in how to do this effectively. You're
multiplying yourself, really.
Yeah. So, and we want to do it through the church. And so that's a big thing. Ministries like ours will always save money, but
sure. Obviously, Facebook likes don't pay the bills. Come on, everybody. You got to realize that about the missionary venture. I mean, thanks for all the likes. That was very sweet of you. But so if people want to go to your website, I've just posted a link, silkroadcatalyst.com. Is there a way for them to give financially, by the way?
Yes. Yeah. There's always a way to give on there. Even on our Facebook page, there's a button. Facebook has it.
Smile. Yep.
Yeah. Well, actually, don't just shop on Amazon. That doesn't get us very much.
No. That gives
but if you do shop on Amazon, but I'm sure David will throw his out there too and compete with you.
No, this one's all about Silk Road Catalyst. I pray that those people who are going to be watching this live, others who are going to watch the replay, would really get behind your vision. I mean, when you talk about creating missionary training centers, empowering locals to reach their own tribes, people groups, facilitating missional lifestyle cross-culturally, especially along places that have never heard the gospel, you guys have got to go check out Silk Road Catalyst. I'm really proud of Steve, and I'm blessed to be able to just share this conversation, because I know that there's very few who understand the reality of lostness in the 1040 window among the unreached peoples. And as you talk, I hear specifically, your years of knowledge and passion for unreached people groups. It's something that bites you, doesn't it? I mean, for me, that's all I think about. I write about, all I blog about, unreached people groups.
Yeah, I think I've talked about the refugees more than most people want me to talk about, actually. Just
Yeah.
because they come from, they're coming from that region. So
Sure. And they're not the negative view perspective of what we get on the mass media, right? I mean, these are real people with real issues. And we'll definitely be praying for you, Steve, about that. Pray wisdom and blessing and understanding for each step, and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and trying to get that training center going. It's not an easy task, especially cross-culturally, cross-lingually, and in these areas where, it's illegal to do what we're doing many times. Very hostile environments for the Christian gospel. I'm not talking hostile like persecution. Starbucks removed the word Christmas from their coffee cups persecution. Okay. I'm talking about
kind of like the red cups.
Is it kind of like that?
No, I like the red cups.
Oh yeah. Hey, if there's coffee in it, I'm drinking it. All right. Give you a break. Well, Steve, very, very good to have this conversation with you. I think it was enlightening. It was kind of like a history lesson, inspiration for missions all at the same time. And again, engaging people for reaching the least reached peoples. And before we end, by the way, I'm getting ready in 15 minutes here to do another blab, Bible News Radio. You have to go check them out. Follow them. I'm doing an interview with them about persecution as an eyewitness. I think it's called Persecution from an Eyewitness Interview with David Joannis. So I'm really excited to be giving more specifics about perhaps a lot of my interrogations, being pushed around and beat up a little bit by the police. Very menial compared to what the underground church is actually going to. But I'm going to post that link. It's going to be on in 15 minutes. So I'm excited to do that. And again, follow me on Blab here. Make sure you share this with a friend. Get involved, engage. Next time, call in, because I would love to see more people inspired for those who have yet to hear the gospel. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, Steve. It was really a great conversation, and praying blessings upon you, Silk Road Catalyst, and every place your foot steps along the Silk Road.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Well, blessings, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. God bless.